in your channel.
Okay, yeah, that'd be a good idea.
All right. Well, shall we start? Shall we hit the ground running?
Yeah, because you know, my clock started, so you're being billed for this, so you might as well ask questions.
You're just like a Punjabi taxi driver now. Okay. Well, I let's start with something simple. Let's start with something current.
Oh, Divya, I said hello to Divya also.
Okay.
Jai Shilacharya, please accept my humble obeisance.
And hello to everybody.
So let's start with something current. Will Smith's slap. What's your take on that?
Probably not the most intelligent thing he ever did.
Okay. So you think it was wrong at any level?
Yeah, I don't think you should walk up in a public place and just slap someone. And also, you see, what he didn't understand is that that program is being watched by millions of people, and he has to respect those people. And there's all kinds of, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of professional actors who are invested in it. And so you can't just like hijack the program. If you have a problem with someone, then after the show, you deal with it, but you don't just take over the show and force millions of people to you know, have to participate in your problems. So he didn't respect the other people who were in the show. He didn't respect the audience. He just suddenly, it was just only about him and his wife, and no one else mattered. And so, I mean, I think if he could do it again, he probably wouldn't. It's, you know, he obviously, instead of just flying off to see, you know, that so-called guru, he probably should read a good Jane Austen novel, you know, because, you know, learn some little better manners.
Okay.
But I think he's a nice person. I mean, he's a nice person. Just we all make mistakes, I guess. I have to say it just because I'm humble. Just kidding.
Very funny.
Oh, by the way, everyone that's listening, you can put your video on, and it's nice to see everybody. So if you're listening to the program, you're welcome to show yourself.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Wow, there are actually living entities out there.
There are, yes.
Hey, is that in Iowa? Yeah.
Yeah, she said.
Yes, Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisance. It's so good to see you.
Hare Krishna. Yes, huh?
You've been here. You've been here in this office.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's nice to see everybody. It's actually a pleasure. There's good old Yashodeva.
We've been pronouncing it wrong for a long time, right?
What have you been saying?
Yasudev.
No, actually, the O is longer than the first A because it's a diphthong. It's a double vowel, but I won't get into all the phonetics. Okay, next question.
Next question. Another current question. Putin. Well, is he a Rakshasa? Is the same thing that happened in the Mahabharata? All these.
I don't know. I think I'd say more Asura. I don't know if he actually eats people, but he definitely is acting like an Asura. I mean, I think he's grossly irrational, even about material things. He's delusional, and he doesn't hesitate to cause the death of many, many tens of thousands of innocent people just to feed his own maniacal wishes. So yeah, someone who will kill huge numbers of innocent people just to feed their own ego is that's Asura.
That fits. Okay, something also current. What do you think of this mental illness pandemic that the youth is suffering like apparently like never before? They're an incredible amount.
Well, but everyone knows the reason. It's because of social media. because, our brains are made, we're wired to have normal, let's say, three-dimensional interactions with other people. And we actually develop our minds and we develop mental health by association. In our case, because we are transcendentalists, we depend on devotee association. But whatever one is aiming at, jnana or karma or yoga or whatever you want to be, association, three-dimensional live contact with other human beings is a big part of sanity. And so we know that everyone knows this is science has known this for years, that the social media is addictive, it's mentally debilitating, and it's basically destroying people. So this is not like a mystery, like, why is this happening? Plus, another problem is that kids are growing up in a very narcissistic society where people say absolutely, like, clinically insane things like, I'm perfect the way I am. Or they say to other people, you're perfect the way you are, which really should get you a free ticket to the nearest mental health clinic. It's one thing to say that, here's Varesha. It's one thing to say that, like, we need a certain minimum amount of self-confidence in order to function in a healthy way in this world. But all of us need to improve. We're in this life to learn, to get better, to improve, to purify ourselves. That's why we're in the world. And so they're just, in a sense, if you look at two different trends, historical trends going on for centuries, it's easy to explain all this madness. One is called capitalism. And the basic principle of capitalism is that you make something or find something that you can sell to somebody else. And of course, one of the easiest ways to sell something is to flatter the person. Even Prabhupada talked about this, to sell books, flatter the people. So basically, in a capitalist world where everyone is trying to sell something to everyone else, so people are being completely drowned in this false and, absurd praise, like, you're a wonderful person, therefore you should smoke this cigarette, or therefore you should buy this car because you're so sexy and you're so cool and you're so this and you're so that. And so really the environment, like the public environment, is saturated with advertising, saturated with eroticism. And the more one becomes sexualized, basically, the more crazy they become. And so in a society which is just completely permeated by lust and by this collective narcissism, which is sort of the natural result of ubiquitous, like all-pervading advertising, people are very much in the modes of passion and ignorance. When Prabhupada was on the boat in the Boston Harbor, he said, people here in the modes of passion and ignorance. My God, if America in 1965 was passion and ignorance, I don't know what you'd call the situation now. And Krishna explains in chapter 18 of the Bhagavad Gita, verses 20 and 21, that in the mode of goodness, you see the difference. People, there are different races, there are different religions, there are different genders, different ages, different species, different ethnicities, different nationalities. There's a lot of variety here. But in the mode of goodness, Krishna says, within all those variety differences, there is a oneness, because the exact same soul or nature of soul, we're individual, but the exact same nature, soul nature, is in everything and everyone. And so therefore, Krishna says, avibhaktam vibhakteshu, undivided within the divided. So obviously you see the variety, but within that variety, you see that actually we're all one. But in the mode of passion, you take the differences to be fundamental. Like men and women are different, period. You know, people of different ethnicities, people of different religions, people of different nationalities, different ages, different political orientations. They're just different. And there's no underlying unity that you can appeal to. And that's the situation. Why is the world so polarized? Because people are so stuck in the mode of passion. And therefore, they actually cannot perceive the unity of all life. They cannot perceive the oneness of all beings. So this is the result of lust, of illicit sex. It's a result of greed. And you know, what is the world about nowadays if not lust and greed? So therefore, in a world dominated by lust and greed, people will hate each other. They will see no common denominators between each other, among each other, and you'll get the hell on earth that we're witnessing today. In a few words.
Yeah, that's quite succinct.
Succinct.
Succinct, the end of the world in a few words. We've been struggling lately as we are reading for Bhagavatam class, and I'm going to ask you to go to your database for 42541, the most recent. 42541.
Okay, one moment. I'm on my way.
Okay, this is a casualty produced verse.
On my way to Mandalay. Let's see.
The purport.
Okay, is there something about the purport that caught your attention?
Look at the end of the purport.
The woman who represents intelligence was searching after her husband. This indicates that intelligence cannot act without consciousness. A beautiful woman is useless unless protected by the proper husband. Intelligence must always be very fresh. Therefore, the word aprodham, very young, is used here. Material enjoyment means utilizing the intelligence for the sake of rupa, rasa, gandha, shabda, sparsha, form, taste, smell, sound, and touch. So, what's the problem?
Oh, maybe I gave you the wrong verse. What was Yasudev? What was
No, I was. Is it the phrase
Oh.
"a beautiful woman"? I was joking.
Oh,
A
okay.
beautiful woman is useless unless protected by the proper husband. Is that the idea? Is that what you were talking about?
No, I was talking about rape.
Oh, the famous. What verse is that?
I think it's either the previous one or the next one. I can't
Oh.
remember.
Yeah, I don't think anyone in ISKCON has ever been bothered by that.
That's very funny.
Let's see. Okay, next verse. Next verse. Nope. You got to give me the right verse, Atman.
1 second. Yes, Yasudev Prabhu, what is the verse? He's gonna check.
41.
What is it?
41. 25,
40.
41.
Oh, 41.
420. Okay, 1 second. Okay, the probably the most popular purport in ISKCON. So, yes, a man is always famous for his aggression toward a beautiful woman, and such aggression is sometimes considered rape. I would say maybe the only way you could make sense of this in a way that won't get us, crucified in the modern world is that Prabhupada is really talking about aggressiveness. In fact, what I've always heard from psychologists and from women actually is that women don't generally like a man who's like very timid in that particular activity. And so Prabhupada, I mean, in a sense, Prabhupada is giving, actually, I just thought I hadn't really thought of that before. I mean, it's the case, but I think that's really the answer to this problem. Prabhupada is giving a special definition for rape. Although then he says, a man is always famous for his aggression toward a beautiful woman, and such aggression is sometimes considered rape, although rape is not legally allowed. So it seems like Prabhupada is talking about criminal rape, not legally allowed. I don't know if there's a cultural issue here in the sense that in India or West Bengal, which is extremely, or was when Prabhupada was here, extremely conservative culturally, and whether like seduction is considered rape. Or I don't know what the laws were in West Bengal. I mean, in a sense, if I wanted to be a good scholar here, I would have to know the legal definition of rape in West Bengal, because Prabhupada tended to generalize from his local experience. For example, Prabhupada says in a Gita purport that the hottest months of the year are May and June, which is true in India, but not really anywhere else. I don't know about the Middle East, but those are the two of the coldest months of the year in the Southern Hemisphere. On the West Coast of the United States, the hottest months of the year are August and September, which is very well known. So Prabhupada doesn't say in India the hottest months, he just states it as a general fact. And so there's a bit of that in Prabhupada's books where he'll take something which is true in a specific context, but then he'll just state it in an unqualified way, which suggests that it can be universally applied, when of course that's not the case. But Prabhupada does that. He tends to just state things which grammatically are general, even when Prabhupada knows that it's not true everywhere. He just kind of states things categorically. So therefore, Prabhupada says, although rape is not legally allowed, I would have to see what the laws are in West Bengal or in India regarding male sexual aggression. Like, at what point does it become criminal? In America, they have all these definitions. Like, at a certain point, the woman says, I don't think so. So, everyone in every society, rape is criminal, but exactly at what line do you cross when it becomes legally rape? That's, culturally determined in many places, and it's not the same everywhere. So until I found that out, what was the legal definition of rape in West Bengal or in India when Prabhupada wrote this, I would want to know that before I went further. Because I would have to eliminate the possibility or confirm it that in Prabhupada lived in a society where what in the West might be called aggression in India was actually criminal. If that was the case, that certain type of like seduction or a certain type of sexual aggression, which in America, let's say the West, would not be criminal, but was that criminal in India? Because we've got several things here. We've got aggression, and women like an aggressive man, and in many cases that's true, not always, but in many cases. And sometimes aggression is called rape, and rape is not legally allowed. But aggression, what level of aggression is legally allowed? Clearly, if a man's aggressive but not physically abusive or not criminally harmful to a woman, he can just be kind of like a fast talker, aggressive, and that's not illegal. So Prabhupada said sometimes aggression is considered rape, and rape is criminal, but certain types of aggression are not illegal, they're not criminal. And so all that would have to be sorted out before I think we could make a really intelligent commentary on that. Prabhupada, if Prabhupada were here, I'm sure the BBT devotees could easily convince Prabhupada to take that out of his books. So Prabhupada was quite open to, removing certain statements from his books when they were just too controversial. So again, I would, that's like what happens when you get academic training. You can't answer a question. No, but what I would like to do is I would have to sort all that out before I tried to give an answer.
No, a common advice and approach to women reading this and other topics like that is, in our movement at least, is to be transcendental. Since we are not these bodies, not make much of it. So, but how
Well,
do
that's
you,
not, to me, that's a non-answer. I mean, it seems to me that if someone is a spiritual leader and someone else suspects that the spiritual leader is recommending or just making statements that aren't true and are dangerously untrue, because that statement is not in and of itself spiritual. I mean, it's spiritual. That statement is spiritual if you engage it or use somehow that information to serve Krishna. But just giving a comment about female psychology or female sexual psychology, which is a material subject. It's not a spiritual siddhanta, it's not tattva. And Prabhupada says, and I quoted this in a paper I wrote about Prabhupada's, what are the limits and what are the powers of Prabhupada's knowledge, that Prabhupada himself said that if you think that because I'm your guru, that I know everything about material subjects, that's ludicrous. And the word ludicrous means not only absurd, it actually means comically, so absurd it's comical. So therefore, to think that Prabhupada, because he's Prabhupada, is an expert on gender psychology, according to Prabhupada's own statements, would not be a reasonable conclusion, according to Prabhupada's self-definition.
no, one thing is to explain it to someone who's been in the movement for a while and has understood the philosophy to a certain degree, and another is to explain it to a newcomer that opens the everything is fine until the Gita starts throwing gender discriminatory statements, and the Bhagavatam gets even thicker. So how do you deal with a person who doesn't know enough to understand the principle between the guru being infallible spiritually, but there is some leeway?
I would just tell people the truth. I believe we should treat adults like adults. I think one of the biggest problems in the Hare Krishna movement is massive manipulation, where if you think about it, our three main activities, Harinam Sankirtan, book distribution, and Prashadam distribution, they're all sort of grounded in the principle that we can manipulate people who don't actually know what's happening to them. Like, the famous thing, you go out on Harinam Sankirtan, the sound goes in their ears. They don't know what you're doing, but the sound went in their ears. In other words, we basically, I mean, at least in the West, in India, it's very different because people there actually, you can talk to them about these things directly. I think you can actually talk directly in this country, frankly. But ISKCON has become so totally invested, heavily invested in the idea of manipulating people rather than convincing them. And I think that's very unhealthy. And even when, maybe not you, but even when the question is, well, what do we tell new people? It's sort of like, how do we continue to manipulate them? And personally, speaking from my humble position as a Hare Krishna guru, I think that we should treat adults like adults. I mean, unless they're like 11 years old or something. I think we should treat people like adults and just tell them the truth. The Prabhupada, I have no question that in my mind, the Prabhupada had pure intentions. I don't think Prabhupada had some impurity. I think he was doing his best to save people, and he was relying on material knowledge that he was taught, and he assumed, had some kind of basis for it. Prabhupada was not like a big fact checker in material things. Like, for example, someone told him about the Aquarian Gospel, which talks about Jesus going to Jagannath Puri, and then Prabhupada kind of, brought that into his repertoire. he would talk about the Aquarian Gospel here and there. But then it turned out that, well, it was, written about, I mean, from the time Prabhupada was saying that, maybe like, 50 or 60 years before Prabhupada heard it. It was just a modern thing some guy wrote. It had no lineage, it had no antiquity, and certainly wasn't a reliable account of the life of Jesus. So, and then Prabhupada stopped saying it. Prabhupada heard in college that women's brains are, I forget, 32 ounces, I forget the exact size. You know how much your brain is? So,
64 and 32.
Yeah, so, I mean, Prabhupada didn't fact check that. He heard something a half a century before and just thought, whatever, I'll repeat it. Prabhupada came from a culture where you can have very high moral principles, but in order to achieve your high moral aims, you can kind of tell a story. I mean, I heard Prabhupada giving lectures more than once, where he was saying to impress people, we have so many temples, each temple has so much money and so many vehicles. Now, it's interesting. First of all, the numbers were exaggerated. Secondly, that's the way you might attract people in a third world country like India or proud of grow. Oh, by the way, if you came in late, everyone's welcome to turn their video on. It's nice to see everyone. Makes it more personal. So if you don't become a monster under the full moon, then feel free to turn your camera on. So Prabhupada was, I mean, in India, the way you get respect is if you've got it, flaunt it. So Prabhupada in America would say, like, we have so many centers, we're making so much money, we have so many cars. I mean, that's not the way you get respect in America for a spiritual movement. In fact, it puts doubts in people's minds. Like, if you're so spiritual, why have you, why are you talking so much about money? Why do you have all this jewelry on? Prabhupada's desire was pure. It doesn't in no way means that Prabhupada was not a pure devotee, but he was making cultural assumptions based on his experience, just like he had a lifelong experience that the hottest months of the year are May and June. And he grew up in a country where you impress people by flaunting your wealth. And so, I mean, there was definitely sometimes a lack of, I think, of cultural communication, which again is not a spiritual defect in Prabhupada. It doesn't mean Prabhupada was impure. It doesn't mean, and also, I mean, because Prabhupada had pure motives. I mean, Prabhupada, whenever he talked about women, his ultimate goal was that they be protected, that they be saved, that they not be exploited, that they become Krishna conscious and go back to Godhead. But he was, again, May and June are the hottest months of the year. And women are like this and men are like that. And a lot of it is culturally specific. And Prabhupada, I should say, I mean, Prabhupada did not, he's not like Alexander de Tocqueville, who in 1830, went to America and wrote that famous book, Democracy in America. Prabhupada did not go to America in the mood of a cultural anthropologist. I mean, Prabhupada never mentioned that he read a single book on American history, on American culture. And, he went to New York, which is not a little sort of typical slice of the USA, Manhattan. So he went to Manhattan, and then he didn't read books about America. And the conversations he had, he did most of the talking. And as he made disciples, they would ask questions and he would answer. So Prabhupada, I don't think as much, although he was in America, I mean, I know, because I've lived in so many foreign countries, I mean, dozens of countries I've gone to. And even though you're in a country, you may learn something about the architecture or, some of the, the food they sell in little food carts in the street or something. But in terms of the deeper psychology of the people, their culture. So you don't learn that just because you're physically in a country, especially if you're absorbed in a different culture. Like even when I went to Latin America or European countries, I'd stay in Hare Krishna temples. So it's just like you can go to literally 300 Walmarts in this country, and it's really true that if you've seen one, you've seen them all. I mean, that's really true. So, I mean, you could say, and I mean, no disrespect, if you've seen one Hare Krishna temple, you've seen them all. And so, at a certain point in my life, when I started this nefarious deviation called Krishna West, and also because I'm writing books, I go to temples like Italy. I mean, I've gone to Italy so many times. I was co-GBC there for a while. And so when I started staying in cities where there was no temple, of course, there were devotees there, and I was strictly vegetarian. But when I really started to learn something about Italy or even Brazil, I mean, there are countries I've been going to for most of my life, and I didn't really start to understand them until I stayed outside temples and just walked around like a normal person and talked to people in their language. So Prabhupada, Prabhupada was obviously very strict in his own spiritual practices, and he was living in his own cultural world, which was a world of, love of Krishna, a very advanced practice of bhakti yoga. Another thing is, there was sort of not a game, but there was this ritual that went on when Prabhupada was here on his morning walks. The morning walks are significant from a socio-historical viewpoint because the morning walk was like the great equalizer in a sense. It was really the only chance that, 95% of the devotees in ISKCON had to actually have a conversation with Prabhupada or ask him a question, because in the class, you could ask questions in class, but if maybe in class also, but you couldn't have a conversation with Prabhupada. You could ask a question, and a lot of times it wasn't like a really brilliant question, and then Prabhupada would say something. So, but in a morning walk, you could actually talk to Prabhupada. You could say something, he'd reply, you could follow up. And so there were lots of devotees who sort of took advantage of that and tried to engage Prabhupada, sometimes in conversation, sometimes very awkwardly and whatever. But what's interesting is that it's almost like to get Prabhupada's attention, or to, I don't know if you say to show off to Prabhupada, or somehow get his attention. Neophyte devotees, young devotees like brahmacharis, because, the women, anyway, ISKCON was, kind of wonderfully misogynistic, but at that particular point, it actually didn't begin that way. It didn't begin that way, but it sort of became that way at a certain point. So devotees would come to Prabhupada and try to tell him the latest, most shocking development of Kali Yuga. Like, Prabhupada, I read in the newspaper yesterday that in, Serbia, priests are eating their children or something. So I made that up. I mean, it's absolutely not true. But they would try to tell Prabhupada the most, the latest unbelievable revelation of the total depravity of Kali Yuga. And so that's kind of what Prabhupada was hearing, like almost on a daily basis. Devotees were telling him the worst possible thing that had happened. And as if that's everybody's doing that. So I think it's a real question. I mean, I've seen that. I've heard and watched so many interviews with Prabhupada. Sometimes the interviews went well. Sometimes the interviewers were really sympathetic, and they kind of, and they had nice talks. But a lot of times there were communication problems. I've seen that often when Prabhupada's being interviewed, that the interviewer didn't quite understand what Prabhupada meant. Prabhupada didn't quite understand the question. And that happened, somewhat regularly. So therefore, the point all this is leading to is, how much did Prabhupada really understand the intricacies and the sensitivities of American culture? And I think that's a legitimate question. It's not challenging Prabhupada's status as a pure devotee. It's not challenging Prabhupada's position as the founder of Charya ISKCON. It's simply saying, and in Bengal, you can do those things. Like, for example, in West Bengal, it's sort of considered cute and totally acceptable to tease children in a way that in the West, we would find, like, I don't want to say abusive, but just inappropriate. Inappropriate. And so, like, if a American lady reporter came to Prabhupada, and what about this thing with 32 ounces? And Prabhupada just kind of like tease her. I mean, that was just the culture he was coming from. And of course, it didn't really win the heart of that person. So, or to give another example, then again, there's nothing to do with Prabhupada's purity. It's about what Prabhupada said, it is comically absurd to think that because he's Prabhupada, he knows all these material things. Comically absurd. For example, once in Philadelphia, I watched this on what I call Prabhupada C-SPAN. It's the unedited, film videos of Prabhupada. And so there was a lady reporter who it was obvious from the conversation, the context, that the introduction, that she was a friend of the devotees. She's a young lady, and she was interviewing Prabhupada, really in the mood of helping ISKCON, to give ISKCON some free publicity. And she raised a question which Prabhupada just kind of brushed off. It just didn't make sense to him. And so she was polite and so respectful, so she went on to the next question. But the question that Prabhupada didn't answer really got to me, because all these bells started going off and lights started going on. I realized that explains a lot of my life. And the question she asked was that, did Prabhupada think that it was somehow going to be harmful to his disciples, the fact that every day they go out dressed in these, what's a nice way to put it, exotic clothes. They go out every day, on Harinam, and the public ridicules them, people kind of, scorn them or ridicule them. And this lady, young reporter, was concerned about the cumulative effect that would have on the devotees' mental health. And in retrospect, could someone please get Dr. Phil to, log in here? But anyway, in retrospect, I actually believe that it did not have such a healthy effect on me.
He's putting a lot of stuff. I'm not interested anymore.
Sarvatma, your microphone is on.
Sorry.
That's okay. You can, in many religions, by giving a large donation, you can be freed of offenses. Anyway, so it kind of like suddenly explained a lot to me. Yes, I really think I think that the cumulative effect of living in a society where every time you walk out the door of your house, people ridicule you and insult you and think you're crazy. I think it actually, some people don't care. Some people, their whole purpose in life is to be freaky, and they adorn their body in certain ways, and they just, kind of create a physical appearance, which is very freaky, and that's the life they want. And that's not me. It's just not my psychology. It's just not me. And I think all those years having people, ridicule me and insult me and even physically attack me because of the way I presented myself to the public, I think it ultimately was not healthy. Another example of, I think, just a lack of cultural communication. Prabhupada, I think he might have been in Dallas. I can't remember. That may not be Dallas, but he's being interviewed by this young couple. They're not real. For me, everything is young now. But he was being interviewed by this couple, and they were saying how there was some so-called guru, so-called religious leader in America, and he was accumulating all this money. So Prabhupada's response, which he presented very heavily, was, you're envious. You think the representative of God cannot have these things. And so, they tried a little bit to explain. Prabhupada, it was very heavy, and, you're envious. There's different ways you can approach that. You can say, well, Prabhupada sees into their hearts, which I think is true. But at the same time, I thought, coming from the culture I do, it was a very legitimate question. And Prabhupada himself talks a lot about bogus gurus who just pose themselves as religious or spiritual leaders for material gain. So it's a very legitimate topic, and could have led to a very interesting discussion on yukta vairagya. And okay, let's say you have a bunch of people who claim to be spiritual religious leaders, and they appear to be living very well. So does it automatically follow that all of them are exploiting their followers? Well, maybe not. Under what circumstances, under what conditions would it be justified to say that a so-called spiritual leader was using these things appropriately? Because of human psychology and the need to create certain symbols and or certain manifestations that help materialistic people to see authority the same way they build these very beautiful opulent churches or mandirs with beautiful gardens. And you can say, why are you spending all that money? That even in terms of people's status in society, according to the status criteria of a particular society, that it's justified to present yourself externally or to the public in a way that sort of, checks the right boxes. But then in America, it's not really like that. I mean, America is actually more like traditional India than modern India. America is more like traditional India than modern India is like traditional India in this sense. Because in traditional India, what did Lord Chaitanya tell Sanatana Goswami? That you have to give away your Gucci chadar, because you can't wear this fancy stuff if you're going to be a sannyasi. So that was Lord Chaitanya. If you look at the cover art of the Chaitanya BBT Chaitanya Charitamrita volumes, and everyone, the sannyasis are wearing rags. They're wearing rags, even Lord Chaitanya. And so therefore, there is a valid cultural principle that people claiming to represent God should demonstrate that, in fact, they are not attached to material things. That's a valid cultural principle under certain historical circumstances, and one that Lord Chaitanya himself enforced. But because India is a third world country, and because India under Lord Chaitanya was the richest country in the world, actually, technically, and then it became impoverished by sort of like very nasty colonial practices. And so typical of third world countries is that people equate wealth with, value in life. Like, you're an important person because of the car you drive, because of the neighborhood you live in. And so therefore, in a third world country, by showing wealth, that creates confidence in people in general, and it attracts higher class people, because in third world countries, you have these very strict barriers between higher classes and lower classes. They speak in different ways, they dress in different ways, they do not associate with each other. It's not just like in America, if you're a billionaire or if you're homeless, you wear blue jeans and a baseball cap and a t-shirt. And so the point is, it's a question of understanding the cultural language of a particular country. So I felt when I heard the question from these two young people about, because they were concerned about a guru or maybe a Christian leader in America who claimed to be a leader and really was bogus and really was exploiting his followers. And, they brought it to Prabhupada. So I think that might've been an opportunity to get into some of the finer points of, how do you tell the difference? But instead, Prabhupada just rejected the whole thing. You're envious. You're bringing that up because you're envious. So again, I don't think that Prabhupada was acting impurely, but Prabhupada said that, in the Bhagavatam, he says that English is not my first language. There'll be mistakes. Well, guess what? Language is culture, and culture is language. For example, when I go to, if I go to Argentina or Brazil or France, you just, when I'm speaking a particular language, you just kind of think differently. Not completely, but like if I'm speaking Italian, one thing, my hands start moving. It's just, you can't stop it. So I don't know. I think personally, I have a different sense of humor in different languages. Because when you learn a language, you learn the culture, because the culture is inseparable from the language. The culture is linguistically expressed. And so when Prabhupada says, I don't know English so well, I think that includes cultural elements. And it also the fact that Prabhupada just really was not interested in this world. Prabhupada, to my knowledge, Prabhupada, I never heard Prabhupada mention that apart from Vaishnava Shastras, that once he left Scottish Churches College, that he ever read another book. I can't think of a book that Prabhupada ever mentioned reading in the next, 50 years. And it doesn't mean that, I have a brother who is materially the most successful one in the family. Just really, really successful materially. He has a law degree. Has an honorary PhD from one of the best universities in Europe and so many things, and very, very wealthy. And so we used to, before he built his big mansion in LA, we lived together in a duplex in Beverly Hills. He lived upstairs, I lived downstairs. And one day I was cleaning out the garage, because that's kind of like, some people are just kind of like garage cleaners. They like to get rid of, they go through all the junk and everything. So I was cleaning out the garage and I found these cardboard boxes, which contained all of his textbooks from Berkeley, because, he also went to Berkeley. And so for me, these were like, I knew the books because they were famous books, famous authors at the time, in history and sociology and psychology. And what was interesting is that he didn't put them in his apartment. And so he got this man, he's a very nice person. He got this huge mansion and there's not really a library in it. Again, he's very intelligent, good person, very successful materially. So, Prabhupada, when he came to America, sort of, okay, I'm going to read a book about American history. It's just not something he was going to do. And there's sort of this mythology, which is very widespread in ISKCON, although Prabhupada rejected it. I rejected it because Prabhupada did, not on my authority. And that is, well, Prabhupada didn't have to read anything. He just knew everything. He knew everything about America. Well, actually, no. And my authority for that is Prabhupada. So the real question here is, do we because many devotees in practice, their position is that I accept Prabhupada as the final authority on everything except one topic. There's one topic in which I don't accept Prabhupada as the authority, and that topic is Prabhupada himself. I don't accept Prabhupada as an authority on Prabhupada. Which, I think that's very bizarre, but it's extremely common in the Hare Krishna movement. So if you want to know whether they went to the moon or not, or if you want to know this or want to know that, Prabhupada said, you just look up what Prabhupada said. But then if you're talking about, well, does Prabhupada know everything? Never mind what Prabhupada said about it, he's just being humble. It's a very handy little trick. Prabhupada says something you don't agree with, either he was just being humble or He said it just for preaching. So these are kind of like the polite ways. They think it's polite to disagree with Prabhupada rather than just openly saying, Prabhupada said this, however, I believe. So I think that when we present Prabhupada, I think as he presented himself, it's not like I have the authority to decide how we should see Prabhupada. I can't tell you that, but Prabhupada can. And I'm repeating Prabhupada's words. So therefore, if we give people a little, what's the old expression, slack? If we just tell people that Prabhupada is a pure devotee, he has perfect spiritual knowledge, he stated over and over again that no one that's not God knows everything about the material world. He doesn't claim to know everything about the material world. In many material subjects, he's sort of relying on what he learned in India. And, and he's open to better information if someone has it. So, like, there's this conversation with a Mr. Tiwari. He was an Indian scientist, and they were walking. It's in the paper I wrote on the subject, actually. And Prabhupada was saying that how the soul is 1/10,000th the tip of a hair. And then he said it's so small that even science cannot observe that. And so the person he was walking with was an Indian gentleman, was a scientist, and respectful. He said, well, actually, Prabhupada, they can measure that. So then immediately Prabhupada said, yes, they can measure it. So that means he didn't lose a beat. He just immediately switched gears. Okay, they can measure it. Well, that means, I forgot exactly what he said, but so again, Prabhupada said it is comically absurd to say that Prabhupada knows everything about material subjects. And gender psychology and gender intelligence is very much a material subject.
Can we move to a different topic, if that's okay with you? And also, I have a few devotees that have questions as well.
Okay, yeah, there's a chat. There's a chat thing.
Yeah, well, actually, they will ask you at a certain point. I just wanted to finish with what I wrote specifically for you. So, are we supposed to be a major religion at a certain point?
Absolutely. That's what we're supposed to be. So if we're not, we don't seem to be really galloping toward that position. I think it's, we should just say like, time out. Like if you're playing a basketball game, you're really losing. You call time out and you go over strategy.
But it doesn't seem like governments consult, well, except in some extreme cases, consult different religions about policy.
Oh, they absolutely do. Of course they do. All over the world. Yeah, absolutely.
In America?
Absolutely. Yeah, all the presidents, they go to this church or that church, they have a minister, and it's not all just piety, it's also self-interest because, for example, the Christian vote is a huge vote. If you get or lose the Christian vote in this country, it's going to change the election.
Would you agree that ISKCON's attempt at education is a failure?
I wouldn't say it's a failure. I think we have a ways to go. I'm trying to be diplomatic here.
Okay.
I just talked to one disciple of mine who was just appointed as the educational director for a very major part of the world, a whole region of the world, one of the most important regions in the world. And I talked to her, and there was just no plan, nothing. It was just kind of like, so, yeah, ISKCON's not famous as an educational movement. I always say this, we spend so many millions of dollars for glitzy temples. Temple of Vedic Planetarium being the most impressive, you could say. But if, how much are we spending? Like, how many first-class ISKCON high schools are there in North America?
You want to tell us?
As far as I know, it's zero. Think about that. Think about that for a moment. Here we are claiming that we're the Brahmins. The Brahmins are teachers, and we cannot even teach our own children. So if I ask the question, how many big, beautiful temples are there in North America with very opulent deity worship? That's definitely be in double figures. I don't know if it'll be in triple digits, but there's going to be a very long list. If I say how many quality high schools are there in ISKCON in North America?
It seems like in some cases, those who give advice, like Brahmins, gurus, sannyasis, do so based on their own perspective and conditioning. How to avoid the trappings of one's own education, tendencies, habits, etc., when trying to give unbiased counsel, and how should the receiver filter understand that he or she is what they are meant to do, as opposed to hearing what works for the one offering advice?
Requires intelligence. There's no substitute for intelligence. You have to know who is intelligent, and if you follow an intelligent person, you'll become intelligent. If you follow someone who's not so intelligent, you probably won't lightning probably won't strike you either. Caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. You have to be a responsible customer of spiritual knowledge.
Can you elucidate a little bit about what is called the second part of Prabhupada's plan?
The second part of Prabhupada's plan? Well, you mean the Varnashram?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but everyone's kind of missing the obvious point. It's like, let's say you're building a house. So you build a foundation, then you start the superstructure. You start to build up, you put in the walls and everything. So what happens, let's say, if you build the foundation, you're just starting to put the walls up, and then let's say there's some kind of natural disaster that seriously damages the foundation. So without repairing the foundation, you just keep putting the walls up. Hey, who's that? Yashodeva? Who's that little kid? You can turn your mic on for a second. Oh.
Oh, he can't unmute himself. I can't. He probably bought it.
My son, Madhava.
Madhava?
Madhava and
Hey, Madhava. Now who?
Madhava
Radha.
Radha.
Hey, Madhava Radha, you are a very beautiful young lady.
Dada.
Dada.
Exactly. Your brother thinks so too. How old is Radha Madhava?
Radha is 4 years old. Madhava is 1 year old.
4 years old. Well, it's nice to meet you, Radha Madhava.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, back to my rant. So if the foundation is damaged, you can't just keep putting the walls up. So when Prabhupada wanted to come to Gita Nagari and introduce Varnashram, he had a very powerful urban preaching mission, which means that there were literally hundreds and hundreds of devotees you could send to farms. There was money. We were in the news, there's publicity. So the urban the urban preaching was the engine. It was the engine that was driving the rural projects. And of course, I think it's very much to Gita Nagari's credit. I think it's very much their credit that without that kind of urban support, they've really built an impressive project with excellent programs. So I give Gita Nagari a lot of credit for that. But still, Prabhupada said, I've done the first half, now I'll do the second half. Well, guess what? The first half vanished. I mean, we still have, there's still some very nice preaching programs. Kalakanta is doing a really excellent job in Gainesville. Now I've heard, he spread to other places. Now I heard he's helping them set up a similar program in Toronto. New York and in Portland, there's some nice programs. And I think in Ypsilanti near Ann Arbor, they have a nice program. I don't know all these things. Gainesville has an extraordinary program. There are many nice devotees in this country. There are many nice devotees. There are many nice programs. But somehow or other, and it's to Kalakanta's credit that he wants to spread what he's learned, which has been very successful, and he wants to spread it elsewhere. That's very much to his credit. So we have good devotees and good projects, but it's unfortunately just, hate to be a bean counter here, but it really can't compare to, in quality it does. I think if anything, devotees are more mature now. I think the preaching is actually better than it used to be. And the devotees are far more mature. But just in terms of raw resources, like how many people do you have to engage? How much money do you have? And so on. The first half kind of went under. There's something survived, and there's some good programs, but so I think the question should be, Prabhupada wanted to build the second half on the foundation of the first half. So what do you do when the first half has been severely reduced? And it seems to me that's the question that needs to be asked, in which I don't know how often it's asked, but that's the pertinent question.
So what's the answer to that question?
That costs more money. The answer to that, to get the answer costs more money. Thank you. It's completely bona fide to laugh at my jokes. So, obviously in Gita Nagari, there are good devotees, a number of very good devotees and nice, famous programs. And of course you have to do the best you can. I think that if the opportunity arises to expand into some urban preaching projects, if it sort of comes naturally and it's not going to weaken the programs you already have, that's what Prabhupada thought. Prabhupada was always very expansive. And so Gita Nagari, it's very well situated. It's in a very interesting part of the country. Many cities, colleges within, let's say, a 2-hour, 3-hour drive. There's, just a lot of people, a lot of intelligence. And so I think it's a question of being ambitious for Krishna. There's some very big programs in America, and I ask the people in them, because you have a successful program, is it your plan now to spread this to other places? And that's the first time I ever heard of that. That's not the way Prabhupada was. I think it's to Kalakanta's credit after developing the Gainesville project that he's doing his best to spread it to other places. So I hope you appreciate that non-answer to the question. But I would say that the more Gita Nagari, the more the devotees there can just find ways to preach. I know you bring college students there in innovative ways. And so the more you can just find ways to preach. New Vrindavan, at one point many years ago, it's in a sense much more isolated than Gita Nagari. And they had tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people coming. Of course, there were a few little problems there. But apart from the problems that Vrindavan had back then, I mean, they did show that you can be a rural project and you can still be powerfully engaging with the outside world, preaching, making devotees.
Okay. I have one question here. Do you think ISKCON is headed for racial schism, dividing the Indian diaspora from everyone else? If you agree that's a real dangerous potential, what could be done to avoid it?
I don't think it's moving in that direction. I mean, recently there was a big controversy over an Indian sannyasi guru, and there was a real cultural divide where the devotees in India and even Indian devotees in the West tended to see it one way. Many, certainly not all, Western devotees saw it another way, and the two ways they saw it absolutely reflect the different cultures in India and the West. And so both sides were very much acting upon cultural principles that they learned from childhood. So 1 second, I'm just going to close the window here. There's a little noise. So I think they are reaching a compromise. I mean, it's very challenging to have a multicultural society. Everyone talks about multiculturalism as if you can't get too much variety. Actually, you can. And by too much variety, I don't mean some cultures, shouldn't be allowed in. I'm saying that actually they did a study. There's this professor at New York University, Jonathan Haidt, who's one of the leading national experts in these things. And he studied the right and the left. It was called The Righteous Mind, I think was the name of his book. And he was saying that why do people who are apparently nice people in other ways, why are they so bitterly divided over these political and social issues? And so he did a serious study, and there's even like a neurological basis for it. I mean, some people are just wired to be very liberal. Some people are wired to be conservative. But in general, and he critiqued both sides, but one of his main critiques of the left, which is, in a number of ways, kind of insane right now, but one of his critiques of it was that they seriously underestimate the minimum necessary level of social solidarity that's needed for society to survive. In other words, a country survives because the people, to some extent, believe in the country. And they believe that, that somehow I have a bond with other citizens of this country. That's why I stop at red lights. That's why I pay my taxes. That's why I follow the law, because I have agreed to follow a social contract. That's solidarity, where you identify with other people, because if you do not identify with other people, then it's us and them. And then when a society gets balkanized, divided into 100 different little societies, and each group fighting for its own interests, I think the left, and I have a lot of criticisms of the right. I'm not a Republican, but my point is that I think in some ways the left consistently is making the country worse in this way. That first of all, they're absolutely insisting, demanding that everyone identify with their body, that you are absolutely your body. And there's no way. In fact, who you are individually as an individual is not really the point. The point is the bodily group you belong to. What's interesting is that in the last election, the studies showed that the Democrats were actually losing votes among minorities, like Latinos and Blacks. Why? Because they don't treat them respectfully. They think they're a bunch of fools that just care about one issue. But actually what you find is that these communities, they're normal, intelligent citizens. They care about the economy. They care about international affairs. They care about lots of things. And so it's just kind of like been drilled into us that no, they're one issue voters. It turned out that Latinos don't really give a damn so much about immigration issues. They're more concerned about the economy, about foreign affairs, about law and order, about all kinds of things. And they actually felt insulted and denigrated by politicians that think that they don't have the brains or the character to care about all the issues that a normal educated person cares about. All they care about is this little political correctness issue. So my point is that on the left, the solution to all kinds of discrimination are that every little bodily group, because ultimately, if you ask the question, how many bodily groups are there? It's race times religion times ethnicity times sexual orientation times all kinds of things. And so if you look at all these things, it turns out there's like hundreds of different groups. And the idea is that every one of these hundreds of groups should be tearing away at the fabric of society to get their place in the sun. And so rather than have a united country that can actually survive, and that's become an issue now in this country, survival, you have 100 different little identity groups, bodily identity groups, each one just fighting narrowly for their own interest. Now, the Krishna conscious solution to things like racism and sexism is exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. The Krishna conscious solution is that we stop all this garbage, all this nonsense that we're our bodies. No, we're not our bodies. All of us are equally spirit souls. And that's why every one of us, regardless of whatever kind of body we have, deserves equal justice, equal respect, because we are all eternal souls. And so Krishna consciousness lifts everyone from all these dozens of different little body groups. Krishna consciousness lifts everyone to a universal platform where we all respect each other. We are all kind to each other because we're all equally part of God. Whereas the material thing makes things worse by emphasizing and only emphasizing how everyone is different from everyone else and how this group is against that group and the other group is against this group. And everyone's fighting. It's just like a big animal free-for-all where everyone's just fighting for their group. And this actually is a threat to the country, to the society, which I think is a shame because it's only because of America, to be honest, that there's an international society for Krishna consciousness. Even if you go to Europe where they have democracy and rights and everything, not exactly as much as in America, even in Western Europe. So it's really, that's why Prabhupada was trying to come back to America, to Gita Nagari, because he recognized that it was specifically because of America that there could be an international society for Krishna consciousness. And even if you look at Europe before World War II, after World War I and II were the same war, it's just they had a halftime show, in between. So if you look at the world wars, before the world wars, Europe was not the big liberal place where, you have to let us chant in the street because, we have our religious rights. Forget that. That wasn't Europe. So it's America, because America was the big winner in the world wars. And therefore, America had the economic and military power to kind of impose its culture. And so you had this dramatic increase of religious freedom and other freedoms all over the world. And because of that dramatic increase in freedom, there can be an international society for Krishna consciousness, and we don't get, crucified or burned at the stake everywhere. So therefore, I think it's in our rational interest as devotees to not want to see America break apart into little pieces. And therefore, I think that political ranting And, in the name of justice, which is actually really dividing everyone, is not a great thing. Like I said, I think on the far right, they have their own stupidities. I'll mention one so you actually believe me that I'm equipoised, with one of those great words you learn when you join the Hare Krishna movement, right? If you hadn't joined ISKCON, you probably would never use the word equipoise. But anyway, so I think what happens on the right is they tend to respect law and order and hierarchy, but they tend to lack compassion. And I think one of the biggest ways, I'll give you two examples where I think the far right or even the strong right is criminally lacking in compassion. One obvious point is on gun laws. I mean, we know for a fact that countries that have stronger gun laws have dramatically fewer gun deaths. So that's a fact. So all the, trashy propaganda coming from the NRA and their supporters, that's all it is. It's just garbage. It's trash. Because we have scientific proof that if you reduce access to lethal weapons, you dramatically decrease criminal murder. That's one thing. And then another thing, which is kind of related, is that people on the strong right, they support negative rights, but not positive rights. And I'm using here technical language of legal philosophy, which I will explain after it has a very low alcoholic content, so don't get excited. That was a joke. I actually use this thing so you can't see what I'm drinking, right? If I used a glass, you could actually see it. Joke. So in terms of legal language, a negative right means it's your right to be free of something. It's your right to not have something happen to you. Like, for example, the right to be free of someone killing you or breaking into your home or raping you, or, to be free from abuse of all kinds. That's called a negative right. And the Bill of Rights actually gives a lot of negative rights, like free from, like sort of unreasonable search and seizure and, and so on. But then there are positive rights, which the people on the strong right, they tend not to support so much. And I think that's their stupidity, frankly. Like, for example, the right to medical care. The right to medical care, the right to a quality education. Whoever you are, however much is in your bank account, the idea that you have a right to quality medical care and you have a right to a quality education, which many people on the right don't support. In fact, I've even heard them give this argument, which I think is pretty stupid, so-called intellectuals on the right, that if I'm a doctor, if I'm a medical doctor, and the government guarantees quality medical care to every citizen, that means that some doctors may be required to treat certain patients who are on, the government programs, and that interferes with their negative right to be free of compulsion. Like the government can't force them to treat someone they don't want to treat, and that negative right trumps the positive right of everyone having a right to quality medical care. Or, for example, they justify and they defend a sort of a crazy division of wealth, where the wealthiest people basically don't pay taxes, and wealth is very polarized. So basically, America, it's not a democracy, it's not a monarchy, it's a plutocracy. Plutocracy means governed by the rich. It's the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rule. So therefore, on the right, their great defect is a lack of compassion. And just, I would say, a basic lack of the glue that holds a society together. They don't understand that when you don't give people justice, when you don't give people access to the basic comforts of life, the basic needs like education and medicine, when you don't provide these things to people, they become disloyal. They stop identifying with the society, and the society starts to disintegrate. And the people on the left, they're certainly equally stupid. They, diversity, fine, but they never talk about unity. They just assume that you can have infinite diversity. I'm not saying that someone should not be allowed to practice their religion or not be allowed to, practice whatever their culture is. I'm saying that if you just bash people over the head constantly with diversity and never say a word about unity, it's just like on the right, they talk about talk about their rights, but never say a word about, well, how do poor people get quality medical care? And how do people from underprivileged situations, whatever their race, it's not just a racial divide. Anyone from any situation, you can talk about the dirt poor white people in Appalachia, who in many ways have a much worse life than many non-white people in many other places in the country, and are much more ignorant. So it's not. So if you, and they just don't get that. They don't. So on the left and the right, I think, why is the unity of the country becoming so fractured? Because on the left and the right, you have crazy people who only talk about what they want and take unity for granted. Not to speak of politicians who are just like compulsive liars and cheaters and thieves. So apart from that, everything's going great. So in the middle is Krishna consciousness. And therefore, I think that for a devotee to become like some big Trump supporter, or to become some big left-wing thing, is actually in a sense betraying Prabhupada. Because if you accept our philosophy, this is a point I made in Spanish a week ago or so. If you accept our philosophy, well, guess what? Prabhupada gave us not only a philosophy of God, he gave us a social philosophy. He gave us a political philosophy. And that social and political philosophy do not match all the stupidity coming out of the far right and the far left. So therefore, we have our own philosophy. We're supposed to be the Brahmins. Prabhupada came to this country to restore the Brahmin class. So the Brahmins should not degrade themselves by going and begging political and social philosophy from crazy people who totally identify with their bodies. I think to get really involved, to really get behind the left or the right is for a devotee, is a degradation. That's my humble position, and I'm sure you were all deeply impressed by the intensity of my humility in sort of, in a very hesitating, timid way presenting my views.
Very impressed indeed, but I'm not sure it's for the same reasons. I would like to present maybe one more topic from my end, and then open up the floor or the computer.
When do we get out? When do we get out the donation thermometer, where everyone starts giving money and then the thermometer starts rising?
Just to quote politicians, the check is in the mail. What is the? We were talking with, let's say, a conservative Swami recently about the role of Vanaprastha, and one thing that, I mean, he didn't go off and express his own opinion, although he was somewhat biased in my opinion, saying that pretty much the final stop of that bus is sannyas. So everybody who is a Vanaprastha is taking sannyas, even though Prabhupada.
No, there's an obvious reason why everyone shouldn't take sannyas, because then who's going to give me my free lunch every day?
Well, we'll cook for you, but still, we would like.
No, okay. First of all, we are not obsessed with sexuality. And frankly, being obsessed with celibacy is a sexual obsession. And it's just, to put it in more traditional Vedic terms, it ain't cool. And so therefore, everyone just does their best. I mean, we all know, anyone that has half a brain knows that when you're really lusty, those are not your most brilliant Krishna conscious moments. I mean, and you know, this is not rocket science, that when your mind is infected by lust, you're not at your best, you're not at your most spiritual. So we all know that, like any fool knows that, you know, lust and pure spiritual consciousness are kind of, you know, are in opposition. So, okay, we all agree on that philosophically. Now, the question is, what is your strategy to deal with your material body? You know, what's your strategy? And as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, if you eat too much or too little, sleep too much or too little, you cannot practice spiritual life. And he says, Krishna says, these are just examples. It holds true for all sort of, you know, your human needs. One of the human needs, I think, is not to be a complete outcast in society, which is why I started Krishna West. But anyway, so what, you know, there are different strategies. There are different strategies for controlling lust. Frankly, I couldn't care less whether someone takes sannyas or not. I mean, who cares? The real issue is, how much service are you doing? How much service are you doing? If someone's married, and in that married situation, they can, you know, do a lot of valuable service, then do it. I've seen too many devotees who did really valuable service, then the guy wanted to take sannyas and are doing much less service. It's about service. It's about saving the planet. It's not about showing off your celibacy. So it's
Wasn't that a problem with Bhishma himself?
Yeah, that's a whole other topic. I won't go into it right now. But so I think, I mean, the rule is be as austere as you can. And if by being austere, you're starting to get weird and a little funny in the head, then maybe, you know, just calm down a little bit. So you know, someone should take sannyasa. They can do it in a natural, healthy way, and they can still have great human relations with other people, and they don't get weird and they don't get fanatical, and they can just, you know, be a friend to everyone. So I would say, and that's an individual decision. I mean, if you're a householder, I mean, or whatever you are, you can, or brahmachari, you can consult with people you trust, but ultimately you have to be intelligent, you have to be practical, and you have to see what's the best position to pursue your service. And I don't think, you know, one size fits all. I mean, emphasizing everyone should give up family life is, I mean, obviously history shows that's not going to happen. Maybe if we, you know, give people maybe a fourth or fifth or sixth vaccination that really has all the weird stuff some people think are in it. And then, you know, or just, I don't know, maybe you have like, I don't know, chemical castration or something. So, but in the real world, in the real world, it's just try to be a good devotee. Try not to be selfish. Try not to just think about yourself or the people you're with. Try to think about how you can help Prabhupada. And then, you know, you're an adult and you have to figure out what's the best position for you. Is it as a householder? Some people are more effective, more powerful as householders. Some people serve better, you know, in a renounced position. But then again, if you have a wife and children, if you have a husband and children, those are responsibilities. Please note that Prabhupada always preached that you take sannyas at 50, but he took sannyas at the age of 63. He took sannyas at the age of 63. Prabhupada was a pure devotee. He had no attachment to family life, but he had a sense of responsibility. So it's a complex subject. It's not just some simple little, like the good old days of ISKCON, everyone leave your family. Because they actually weren't the good old days in many ways.
At this point, I would like to offer the devotees a chance to ask questions. I know Agari had a question, Yasudev had a question, and
Step right up, step right up.
let's start with those two. And
Okay. So, Agari?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much for your great insights. My question relates to this chapter, which Sarvatma Prabhu quoted. So is there any, in pursuit of the seven purposes of ISKCON in terms of creating more writings to proliferate the other six purposes of ISKCON, is there any preaching value or social value based on what you were talking about in terms of unity to render the allegory of King Puranjana for, different gender psychology? So, for example, the King Puranjana is rendered for a heterosexual male. Could one render it, for example, for a transgender king, and then Puranjani would be a eunuch, for example, and then with the associated characteristics to demonstrate more explicitly that.
Well, as far as I don't know how many dozens of genders there are now. I mean, they expand exponentially. Here's the facts. I mean, I hate to be politically incorrect, but you have to choose either sanity or political correctness. So, first of all, obviously, every member of society who's not criminal, every member of society should be treated with respect. And if someone is born in a certain way with certain, like their body and mind don't match or something, so they want to alter their body so it matches their mind, or, this kind of sexual or that kind of sexual, whatever. First of all, I am a very strong advocate of eliminating culturally public displays of sexuality. To me, sexuality is a private thing. It's not public. And therefore, whatever someone's sexuality is or orientation or whatever, if including heterosexuals, if people are just discreet and don't just bring sex into the public where it doesn't belong, then who gives a damn what somebody is? I mean, if I meet somebody, they're a nice person and they want to serve, it's not my business what sexuality they have. It's none of my business. And so I think, one big step we need to take is to just put sexuality of any kind back where it belongs, in private life. That's one point. And another point is that, for example, I wear glasses. Actually, I'm become increasingly disappointed by this particular style. And so if you've also been, secretly feeling sorry for me because I chose such unfashionable glasses, I went to the optician today and because I had my prescription changed, so I will be in the future more ocularly appropriate. But anyway, so for example, I was born with a certain deficiency in my eyes, or you could just say I was, different. I needed glasses. And so I could say, well, no, this is normal, even though, most people have better uncorrected vision than I do. But still, it's like, it is a fact that all mammals, let's just talk about mammals for now. We could talk about birds and reptiles. But most creatures in this world sexually reproduce. And the sexual organs are, and here's a real shocker, reproductive organs. And so to deny that a male-female connection which enables reproduction, there's nothing natural about that. Like, oh, that's not the default biology. That's just, it's like you have all these different sexualities. They're all completely equal. I mean, in one sense, that's true. It's true in this, I'll tell you the sense in which that's true and the sense in which it's not true. It's true in the sense that we have individual rights. It's interesting because Krishna says that you have a right to do your duty. It's the only time in the Gita he uses the word right, adhikara, which means like a human right. He only uses that word in that context once. And he says you have a right to do your duty. He also says many times that your duty is born of your nature. So let's say, for example, and Krishna also says that you have to be moderate in dealing with your bodily desires. So put all that together. And if someone is born with a particular sexuality, in a sense, that sexuality, whatever it may be, defines their duty. Because obviously, the reason you have human culture is because people can't just go out in the street and sexually attack each other. Because you can't have a society like that. Therefore, sexuality, it's interesting. If you look at the word dharma in the Mahabharata, I did a computer search. Actually, the first 300 chapters of the Mahabharata, 300, searching for every use of the word dharma, including dharma, adharma, vidharma, swadharma, everything. All the different categories in which the word dharma is used. What I found is very interesting, that the word dharma is used in the Mahabharata hundreds of times, almost always, practically always, in terms of regulating two activities, sex and violence. Sex and violence. If you look at the whole Chatur ashram system, it's all about how you deal with your sexuality. Because a brahmachari or brahmacharini, which is a real Sanskrit word and a real Vedic position, brahmacharini, in case some genius told you it's not. For example, in the Mahabharata, Brihaspati's sister is called brahmacharini. So no, Prabhupada didn't make it up. Anyway, if you look at brahmachari and brahmacharini, it's just a way to deal with sexuality, namely, just don't do it. Because you're young and you can get married later. Then if you become a grihasta, again, it's a strategy in order to deal with sexuality. Okay, you can get married. And then when you become a vanaprastha, you still have the contact with the opposite sex in terms of friendship and cooperation and helping each other serve, but it doesn't become physical if you're actually doing it right. So again, it's how to relate to the opposite sex. That's what, and of course, sannyasi means you go, in a sense, you complete the circle. So you follow the same rules of brahmachari, but this time you know a lot more about life. And it's kind of like you cross the river and burn the boat. So you can't go back across. So in that way, the whole ashram system is really just a series of strategies to deal with your sexuality. That's one point. And, oh my God, let's call later. I can't believe, well, people call me, I have a little thing on my phone where if they're calling to give a donation, then I get a different colored light and then I answer it. I'm joking, that's just a joke. So Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita that he says, this is 3.33 Gita, sadrasham cheshtate swasya prakriter. So what is that sadrasham cheshtate swasya prakriter jnanavanapi prakritim janti bhutani nigraha kinkarishati. Krishna says that even a wise man, Jnanavan is a big thing in the Gita because Bahunam Janmanam Anti, after many births, one who gets it surrenders to Krishna. That's the same word, Jnanavan. Krishna says even a Jnanavan will act according to their own nature. Because as an absolute rule, Prakriting Janti Bhutani, creatures follow their nature. Nigraha kinkarishti, what will repression do? And then Krishna says, number one, you can't not follow your nature, because I saw this great bumper sticker that said, like in baseball terminology, nature bats last. So then Krishna says that not following your nature, not doing the duty born of your nature is more dangerous than death. Krishna says in chapter 18, your duty is defined by your nature. So what if neurologically a person is homosexual? The word homo, by the way, coming from Sanskrit. Because just like Sindhu, Hindu, S to H, so samohang sarvabhuteshu, S to H, samo, homo. Anyway, it's a little linguistic tidbit for you. You know, throwing a little linguistic tidbit to the natives of Gita Nagari. So if you put all these verses together, and then Krishna says, karmanyeva dikaraste, you have a right to do your duty. That means if someone is neurologically, scientifically homosexual, I mean, not as a soul, but their body is neurologically, physiologically, that's just the way they were born, then it is natural for them to satisfy that sexuality if they cannot be lifelong celibate, which is no longer super popular in the Hare Krishna movement. So if someone cannot completely renounce sexuality, it follows from the Gita, it must be their duty to somehow satisfy themselves on that track. However, here's the point I always make. When I first made this point, actually, there were a lot of leaders moving that wanted to hang me from the highest tree, although now most of them are saying it. So they cut me down, before I died. And that is that monogamy is always better than promiscuity. It is not in society's interest to discourage homosexual people from being monogamous. Because any sexually active person who is not monogamous is going to degrade other people. And therefore, to discourage homosexual people from being monogamous and having committed relationships is encouraging the proliferation of homosexuality. And the same is true for heterosexuality or whatever other things they've now identified. So, I actually have to write one little thing. I actually have to go because I was supposed to do something else. So, and so if you're, whatever your orientation is, you start where you start where you start. It's like if you go to a gym because you want to get in shape, you can't start where somebody else is. That's absurd. You start where you are. So everyone that comes to Krishna consciousness, you start where you are and you start to make progress. And the normal progress is that you work through monogamy to celibacy. That's the normal path. It's kind of common sense, isn't it? So in that sense, it's just as natural for an individual homosexual. It's just as natural for a homosexual to go through these stages as a heterosexual. So on an individual level, though they're equally natural. However, on a societal level, those two things are not equally natural. It is not just as natural for society, because society has a vested interest in regulating procreation, or in somehow connecting sexuality to procreation. Because I'll give you a few reasons why. I think the people on the left are just tend to be, frankly, imbeciles when it comes to, because they deny science. They're the big science deniers. You know, some people on the right deny climate change. People on the left, because they're fanatical about all these social issues, and every one of their fanatical social issues, they deny all the science that contradicts it. And there's an ocean of science that contradicts leftist positions on these issues. But anyway, to give just a few examples, it is a scientific fact, as much as climate change is a scientific fact, that society has a rational, legitimate, vested interest in people, in children being raised within a stable marriage. Why? Because studies show that children that are raised without a father, especially, for example, because the mother is usually the one. I mean, sometimes a mother abandons her child, usually it's the father. But anyway, studies show that when children do not grow up in a stable home, those children, as they grow up, are much more likely to commit suicide, much more likely. They're much more likely to be poor. They're much more likely to engage in criminal activity. They're much more likely to have mental problems. Now, all that taxes society. The battle cry of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. And yet, the left is pushing that, anyone can do anything, and yet it taxes society because they ignore all the science that shows that society has legitimate interest in promoting monogamy and stable, good marriages that raise children to be productive, sane, healthy citizens. And so therefore, reproduction is not merely a private act. Like you say, get your laws off my body. Fine, get your little monster kid off my streets. So therefore, because, that's the whole point. No taxation without representation. Society does have a vested interest in promoting certain things. And therefore, in homosexuality, again, I'm not denying that for the individual, it is just as natural as for anybody else if that's the way they're wired. I'm not disputing that. And it's not a moral issue to me. It's not a moral issue. It's not that someone is immoral because they were born homosexual. That's not a moral issue. It's a neurological issue. However, society does have a vested interest in trying to maintain a connection between sexuality, the sexual act, and the raising of decent children who will improve society. As we know, in homosexuality, the connection between child raising and sexuality is simply severed. It doesn't mean homosexuals are bad people. It doesn't mean they're immoral. It does mean that it is not entirely natural for society. All the different forms of sexuality are not equally natural or equally healthy for society.
Yet they could adopt, a homosexual couple could adopt, and they do, and they raise just a naturally good citizen. So
yes, and if they do that, people like that tend to be highly respected by other good people. So, but again, I don't know if all the studies are in yet, but it is a complex issue. I'm just saying though, I mean, let me put it this way. It is physiological, natural. The reproductive, if you look at a man's body, woman's body, I don't want to gross everybody out here, but we're all adults. They actually fit together reproductively. I mean, it's obvious that the male body and the female body were created to fit together in the act of reproduction. And therefore, to say that there is nothing especially natural about heterosexuality, even though it's the overwhelming majority of people, even though it's biologically natural in terms of reproduction, say there's no way in which heterosexuality is more natural, is, I think, just being stupid. And if someone says, well, but if you say that, then people will discriminate against homosexuals and they will suffer. Well, no, then the moral issue is not doing that. I don't believe in lying. I don't believe in telling stories to get people to do the right thing. I just, I mean, some people probably need to tell them stories, but I think that I don't think once the government starts lying in order to get people to do it, to get people to do the right thing, I think you're going down a weird path, and we don't know where it's going to end. I mean, that's how terrorism, by the way, the word terrorism was invented by a gentleman named Robespierre, one of the leaders and one of the incredibly violent leader of the French Revolution. And Robespierre is very interesting because he was actually like the super moral person. He was almost like fanatically moral. And he came to a conclusion because he had these sort of crazy, impractical, utopian expectations that with the French Revolution were to create heaven on earth, that all the peasants, all the citizens will do the right thing. They won't be like the monarch. They won't be like the nobles. It's just cheated and exploited people. Everyone will be good. It'll be like this utopian thing. And then it turned out that the peasants were, if anything, just as greedy and mendacious, which means they lie a lot, and as the nobles, I mean, sometimes worse. So therefore, Robespierre came to the conclusion that the only way to get the people, just the common people, to do the right thing is you have to terrorize them. You have to keep them in a state of terror so they'll do the right thing. And so in a sense, you find all these different groups on the left, and I'm sure on the right too, but they kind of want to terrorize us, that as soon as you say one wrong word, you're racist, you're a sexist, you're this, you're that, you're blah. You just, it doesn't matter whether you are or not. It just matters whether you disagree with them on any little detail of their philosophy. If you disagree with them in any little detail, your interpretation of history, your concept of what the solution is, it'll just be war, and they will do everything in their power to humiliate you and to just almost like drive you out of society. So, the only reason these people don't kill us is because they can't get away with it. It's not legal. And it's interesting because the French Revolution was obviously a left-wing thing. The Stalin, who was a leftist and wanted everyone to be equal, killed, the communists, Marxists killed between 10 and 20 times more people than Hitler. Interesting, between 10 and 20 times more people than Hitler. Hitler, of course, is like the symbol of evil for our culture. Why not Stalin? Why not Mao? Why? Because people on the left like Marxism, and therefore, even though Stalin and Mao were actually committed greater genocide than Hitler, you're not supposed to talk about it in universities. So it's just like, the sheer level of nonsense that's going on is breathtaking. It's breathtaking. And not only that, if we want to talk, Marxism is my favorite philosophy. Guess who else was kind of coming from a Marxist background? The fascists. Mussolini was a Marxist. People don't know that because the left-wing professors don't talk about it in the universities. Mussolini was a Marxist. I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell you very quickly because I got to go, but Mussolini, people were starting to ask because Marx made prophecies. Prophecies didn't happen. Basically, Marx prophesied that there would be this growing conflict in society between economic classes, the working class and the capitalists. And there would be this growing tension, there would be revolution, and that would lead to the Marxist revolution. And then, so there's 3 stages in the dialectic. This is Marx's application of Hegel's 3-stage dialectic: thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The thesis is like, okay, what's going on now is that these horrible capitalists are just exploiting everyone. What's the antithesis? The antithesis, according to Marx, is basically genocide. Because you have to eliminate, they don't tell you this, you have to eliminate the capitalists, and if they go quietly, fine, but since they won't, you may have to eliminate social classes. Now, the term eliminate social classes is just a nice way to say genocide. But in any case, so in order to guarantee that you get rid of, and Stalin and Mao, of course, carried out this genocidal project. They were very, it's not that, well, they weren't real Marxists. Oh yeah, they were really good Marxists. So it's interesting that in Marxism, you have this status quo, then you have the communist revolution, but since the capitalists won't go quietly, therefore the second stage in the dialectic, the antithesis of capitalism, is the dictatorship of the proletariat. And this is his words, the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, the final stage is Marxist heaven, the communist paradise. And since Marx's evaluation of human nature was completely unscientific, Marx was writing at a time half a century before there even was such a field as psychology. And he was writing at a time when they didn't have a scientific field of sociology. And so therefore his understanding of collective human behavior was completely unscientific. Thus, you never get to the Marxist paradise, and therefore every communist country stops at dictatorship. In case you were wondering, why that happens, now you know. So anyway, so Mussolini was thinking about this, honk if you love Mussolini. So Mussolini was wondering, like Marx predicted, he made all these prophecies that, the workers will arise after they read his books and everything. And so people were asking, some intellectuals in Europe saying, like, what happened? What happened to the prophecies? Mussolini's conclusion was that the Marxist prophecies didn't happen because a new movement had come into Europe, which got people so excited and so fired up that everybody forgot about class warfare among, capitalists and workers. And so what was that new movement that caught everyone's attention instead of Marxism? Nationalism. Nationalism. Now, you may think that people are always nationalists. No, because, for example, in European history, if you needed a new king or queen of England, it's not that, it didn't have to be English. For example, the present royal family in England, Queen Elizabeth II and all those people, they're called the Windsors. They changed their name to Windsor because it's very English. During the World Wars, when people in England didn't like Nazis, their real name was the Hanovers because they came from Germany. So when you needed a new monarch in a country, it's not that they had to be born in that country. That was irrelevant. They had to belong to the right royal family. So nationalism was actually a radical left-wing idea. The idea that ultimately power does not lie in the nation, in the people of the nation, it's in the royal family because God has chosen certain families to rule the earth. And this is called divine right monarchy. Now, nationalism was a movement, say, like, raspberries. We don't care about these so-called, royal families. The people's, power to the people. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. Anyway, so that's what was gripping Europe. Like, you had German nationalism. The Germans didn't go for Marx. They wanted a German state. They wanted to be a nation which locates power in the people of the country, not in a certain family. And then you get the unification of Italy. There was no Germany. No one in the, let's say 170 years ago, no one thought they were German. You were Prussian, or you were Bavarian, or you were Saxon. No one was a German. So they created, this nationalism, they unified Italy. In Italy, you were like Romano, or you were a Veneziano, or you were, your city. But suddenly there's an Italian state. And so therefore, Mussolini said, let's keep Marxism. Let's keep Marxism. We're just going to swap out one moving part. That's all we're going to do. We're going to swap out one moving part for Marxism, which is the engine. The engine is not class conflict, it's nationalism. And therefore, the word Nazi means the National Socialist Party. Think about that. Nazi, National Socialist. So when you get this famous battle between communists and Nazis, it's really a battle over different kinds of Marxism. Which of course they don't tell you in school because the teachers tend to be on the left and, and they totally hide the truth from you. So I forgot how I got into all that. I guess I'm just trying to say that if you think the left is going to save the world or the right is going to save the world, you should have your head examined. What's actually going to save the world is Prabhupada's teachings properly understood. Lord Chaitanya's teachings, Krishna's teachings. We should not turn ourselves into Shudras by following lower than Shudras on the left and right. We should be Brahmanas.
There is a few things to explore if you...
Okay, really quickly. I only have like 5 more minutes and...
how about we'll make it another session sometime in the not so near future. Would you agree to that?
Well, there's one quick question I can do.
Okay.
Mitra Vinda. Where's Mitra Vinda? Is she there?
She's somewhere here. There was actually, prior to her, there was a question from Sahadev and from Yasodev. And
okay, so let's go quickly. I'll just answer the question really quick. And if I can't answer it, then Varesha will answer it.
Okay, go ahead. Yasodev or Sahadev, please. Anybody with ends with a Dev, please unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna, thank you. I think I will hold off my question because I believe it requires lengthy time to answer. So another time.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. So anything else?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I had another question, but hearing your wonderful discourse on history of the left and the right, I'm just impelled to ask one short, quick question. Do you think that devotees should participate in democracy by voting, being active in?
I think it's an individual choice. The problem I have is, do I want to vote for people that kill babies or for people that kill everything else? It's, I feel that you could say, well, it's a lesser of evils. You could say the lesser of two evils. Sometimes it's the evil of two lessers. But I think, I don't really try to, I think it's inappropriate for me to use my position as, whatever I am in ISKCON. I think everyone has to just sort of consult their own conscience and, so I respect everyone's right to make their own decision on that.
Can we now, I want to thank you in my name and name of everybody else, but I will encourage the devotees to unmute themselves and express their gratitude, and then you're free to go. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj.
Hope to see you again soon.
See you again soon.
Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Same time next week.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all very much. And I hope I'll be able to visit you someday soon.
Thank you so
Hare
much.
Krishna.
Thank you for the.
Thank you,
Hare-
devotees. It will be on the 30th, which is next Sunday. We're going to have a Bhagavatam class with His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Goswami. So please stay tuned. That's Sunday, the 30th at 7 a.m. Thank you for your company, attention, questions, and we'll see you soon. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.